In the summer of 1990 Jan 2, a farmer, northwestern China, was digging a well behind his house. His shovel struck something soft. He assumed it was a root or perhaps a dead animal buried in the soil. He kept digging, trying to work around the obstruction. But the more he dug, the larger the thing seemed to be. Finally, he reached down and pulled it out with his hands. What emerged from the earth was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a human head, weighing perhaps 5 kilograms. Its surface was pale, yellowish, jan white, with a texture that resembled raw meat, jan smooth in some places, wrinkled in others, slightly translucent at the edges. When he pressed it with his finger, it yielded like flesh, then slowly sprang back to its original shape. It was not a plant. It was not an animal. It was not a fungus. At least not any fungus, he recognized. It was wet. Even though the soil around it was dry, it had no roots, no stems, no leaves, no eyes, no mouth, no organs of any kind that he could identify. It simply was. The farmer brought it to his village. No one knew what it was. They brought it to the county agricultural office. The officials there had never seen anything like it. They sent photographs to the provincial capital, then to Beijing. The response came back within days. The farmer had found something extraordinary. Something that Chinese emperors had spent fortunes searching for. Something that Taoist alchemists had devoted their lives to obtaining. He had found a Taisui, a flesh mushroom. The legendary meat of immortality. To understand why a lump of mysterious flesh could cause such excitement, you need to understand its place in Chinese history. The Taisui, literally great year, or Grand Duke Jupiter Jan, is one of the most enigmatic substances in Chinese tradition. References to it appear in texts dating back over 2,000 years, and the descriptions are remarkably consistent across centuries and regions. It is said to be found underground, usually by accident. It resembles meat, but is not meat. It has no fixed shape, growing and changing over time. It bleeds when cut but does not die. Pieces removed from it will regenerate. It seems to be alive, but it is not any known form of life, and most importantly, those who consume it will live forever. The earliest clear reference appears in the classic of Mountains and Seas, a text compiled during the Warring States period, around the 4th century BC. The book describes a substance called Shiro Jan Shiro, or seeing meats, Jan, found in certain mountains. There is a thing called Shiro. It has eyes but no form. When eaten, it regenerates. Those who eat it will never die. The description is cryptic, almost dreamlike. A meat that sees, a flesh that regrows, a food that grants immortality. Later texts elaborated on the legend. The Shenong Bensaojing, and the foundational text of Chinese medicine, attributed to the mythical Emperor Shenong Jan, classified the Taisui as a superior medicine, one that could be taken indefinitely without harm. It was said to nourish the vital essence, strengthen the organs, and extend life beyond natural limits. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, was obsessed with immortality. He sent expeditions across the known world searching for the elixir of eternal life. According to some accounts, the Taisui was among the substances his alchemists sought most desperately. He never found it. He died at 40 Jan 9, probably from mercury poisoning, Jan the result of consuming immortality elixirs prepared by his court alchemists. But the search continued. Throughout Chinese history, discoveries of Taisui were treated as major events. They were reported to the imperial court. They were examined by scholars and physicians. They were preserved, studied, and sometimes consumed by those brave or desperate enough to test the legends. The accounts describe something genuinely strange. A Taisui found in the Tang dynasty was said to have been kept in a jar of water for 3 years. It did not decay, it grew larger. When a piece was cut off and placed in a separate container, that piece also grew. A Taisui discovered in the Ming dynasty was reportedly fed to a dying official. According to the records, his health improved dramatically. He lived another 20 years. A Taisui unearthed in the Qing dynasty was examined by court physicians who declared it to be neither plant nor animal nor mineral, but something between all three. Were these accounts accurate? Were they exaggerated? Were they complete fabrications? For centuries, there was no way to know. The Taisui remained a legend, tantalizing, mysterious, impossible to verify. Until modern science began to investigate, the 1990 Jan-2 Shanxi discovery was not an isolated incident. Throughout the 1990 to 2000, reports of Taisui findings increased dramatically across China. Farmers digging wells, construction workers excavating foundations, villagers clearing land, Jan all occasionally unearthed the same mysterious substance. The specimens varied in size from a few hundred grams to over 70 kilograms. They varied in color from pale white to yellow to brown to almost black. They varied in texture from soft and gelatinous to firm and rubbery, but they shared common characteristics. They were found underground, usually at depths of 1 to 3 meters. They were typically discovered in moist soil, often near water sources. They had no visible organs, no clear structure, no obvious means of obtaining nutrients. They seemed to be alive, Jan. They responded to their environment. They grew over time, they resisted decay, Jan, but they did not fit into any recognized category of life. And when pieces were cut off, those pieces continued to live. The Chinese scientific community took notice. In 1990 Jan-2, researchers at Northwestern University in Xi'an obtained samples from the Shanxi specimen. They conducted preliminary analyses and published their findings in Chinese scientific journals. The results were puzzling. The substance was approximately Bafenjitsisher water, Jan, similar to most living organisms. It contained proteins, polysaccharides, and nucleic acids, Jan, the building blocks of life. But its cellular structure was unlike anything in the biological literature. Under the microscope, the researchers saw something strange. The Taisui was not composed of differentiated cells like plants or animals. Instead, it seemed to be a vast colony of microorganisms, Jan, bacteria, fungi, and other single Jan-celled creatures, Jan, bound together in a complex matrix of organic polymers. It was not one organism. It was millions of organisms, living together in a structure that behaved like a single entity. The researchers had never seen anything quite like it, but they had seen things that were similar. In laboratories around the world, scientists study organisms that blur the boundaries between individual and collective, between simple and complex, between life and something else entirely. They are called slime, and they may hold the key to understanding the Taisui slime molds are among the strangest organisms on Earth. They are not plants, not animals, not fungi, Jan, though they were once classified as all three at different points in scientific history. They occupy their own peculiar branch of the tree of life, defying easy categorization. The most famous species is Physarum polycephalum, Jan, the many-Jan-headed slime. In its feeding stage, Physarum exists as a single enormous cell, sometimes spreading over several square meters. It has no brain, no nervous system, no organs of any kind. It is essentially a bag of cytoplasm containing millions of nuclei, crawling slowly across the forest floor in search of bacteria and decaying matter to consume. But despite its apparent simplicity, Physarum displays behaviors that seem almost intelligent. In laboratory experiments, researchers have shown that Physarum can solve mazes, finding the shortest path between two food sources. It can optimize networks, creating efficient connections between multiple points. It can learn and remember, avoiding areas where it has previously encountered harmful substances. It can even make decisions. When presented with two food sources of different quality, Physarum will allocate its resources proportionally, sending more of its mass toward the better food. When environmental conditions change, it adapts its behavior accordingly. All of this without a single neuron. Slime molds challenge our assumptions about what it means to be alive, what it means to be intelligent, what it means to be an individual. They are colonies that act like organisms. They are simple creatures that solve complex problems. They are ancient life forms that have survived virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. And they share key characteristics with the Taisui. Both are found in moist environments, often underground or in decaying matter. Both lack differentiated organs or clear body structures. Both can regenerate from fragments. Both seem to exist on the boundary between individual and collective life. Could the legendary Taisui simply be an unusual slime mold? Some researchers think so, but others believe the answer is more complicated. In 2010, a team of researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences conducted the most comprehensive analysis of Taisui specimens to date. They obtained samples from multiple discoveries across different provinces. They used modern techniques, Jan DNA sequencing, electron microscopy, biochemical analysis, Jan to determine exactly what the Taisui was. Their findings were published in Jan-reviewed journals and presented at scientific conferences. The Taisui, they concluded, was not a single organism. It was not a slime mold, though it shared some characteristics with slime molds. It was not a fungus, though it contained fungal species. It was not a bacterial colony, though bacteria were present in abundance. It was something more complex, a symbiotic community of multiple life forms, bound together by a matrix of extracellular polymers, a substance similar to the biofilms that bacteria form on surfaces in hospitals, in pipes, on teeth. The researchers identified dozens of species within typical Taisui samples, bacteria of various types, fungi, yeasts, actinomycetes, all living together in a complex, interdependent community. The matrix that held them together was composed primarily of polysaccharides, complex sugars produced by the microorganisms themselves. This matrix gave the Taisui its characteristic texture, firm but yielding, meat Jan-like but not meat. The community was self-Jan-sustaining. The different species provided nutrients for each other, broke down organic matter in the surrounding soil, and maintained the chemical balance necessary for survival. When a piece was cut off, it contained enough of each species to regenerate the entire community. The Taisui was, in essence, a living ecosystem compressed into a single blob. This explained many of its mysterious properties. Its ability to survive for long periods without apparent food, the microorganisms could enter dormant states, surviving on minimal resources until conditions improved, its ability to regenerate from fragments. Each fragment contained the full complement of species necessary to rebuild the community. Its resistance to decay. The community included species that produced antimicrobial compounds, protecting the whole from invasion by harmful bacteria, its growth over time. The microorganisms were constantly reproducing, slowly expanding the colony. The ancient legends were not entirely wrong. The Taisui was genuinely unusual, genuinely resilient, genuinely capable of behaviors that seemed almost supernatural. But it was not supernatural. It was biology, extraordinary biology. But biology nonetheless, the Taisui might seem like a uniquely Chinese phenomenon, a product of specific environmental conditions and cultural beliefs found nowhere else. But similar discoveries have occurred in the West, provoking similar mixtures of wonder, fear, and scientific curiosity. In Nantening, a woman in Garland, Texas found a strange growth in her backyard. It was pale, fleshy, and roughly the size of a dinner plate. It had appeared seemingly overnight, growing in the mulch beneath her trees. When she touched it, it felt like raw meat. When she cut it, it seemed to bleed a pale fluid. She called the local news station. The story went viral, and this was the early days of internet news. When strange local stories could suddenly reach national audiences, reporters descended on the suburban backyard. Experts were consulted. Theories proliferated. Was it an alien organism? A government experiment gone wrong? A new form of life? Laboratory analysis eventually identified it as a type of slime mold, specifically, a species called Fuligoseptica, commonly known as dog vomit slime mold for its unfortunate appearance. It was unusual in size but not in nature. It was strange but not supernatural. The woman was disappointed. She had hoped for something more extraordinary, but the incident revealed something important. The human desire to find mystery in the natural world is not limited to any one culture. Americans in the 21st century responded to a strange blob in a backyard with the same mixture of excitement and speculation that Chinese farmers had displayed for millennia. Similar incidents have occurred throughout Western history. In 1970, 3 police in Dallas, Texas responded to reports of a mysterious purple blob that had appeared in a residential neighborhood. Officers who touched it reported that it felt like living tissue. The blob was eventually identified as a colony of bacteria, probably Chromobacterium violaceum, which produces a distinctive purple pigment. In 1990, 4 residents of Oakville, Washington, reported that strange gelatinous blobs had fallen from the sky during a rainstorm. Several people who touched the substance reportedly became ill. Conspiracy theories flourished, some blamed military experiments. Others suggested extraterrestrial origin. Analysis of the blobs proved inconclusive. Some researchers identified bacterial content, Others found no clear biological signature. The incident remains unexplained, though most scientists suspect a natural origin in perhaps jellyfish fragments carried aloft by waterspouts, or atmospheric bacteria concentrated by unusual weather conditions. And then there is the star jelly of European folklore. For centuries, people across Britain and continental Europe have reported finding mysterious gelatinous substances on the ground. Often after meteor showers, the substance was called star jelly, star rot, or star shot, and believed to be the remnants of shooting stars that had fallen to Earth. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across time and place: a translucent, jelly Zan-like substance, no clear structure or organs, a tendency to evaporate or dissolve within hours of discovery. Modern analysis has identified most star jelly as the remains of amphibian reproductive organs, and specifically the oviducts of frogs, regurgitated by predators who found them unpalatable. The substance swells dramatically when exposed to moisture, creating the impression of a much larger mass. But for centuries, people believed they were finding pieces of fallen stars. The pattern is universal. Humans encounter something strange in nature. They reach for supernatural explanations. Science eventually provides mundane answers, but the sense of wonder and the desire to believe in something extraordinary never entirely disappears. The Taisui is China's version of this universal human experience. A strange substance, a legendary explanation, a scientific reality that is remarkable in its own right, even if it falls short of immortality. So what about the legends? If the Taisui is simply a microbial community extraordinary, yes, but not magical, why did ancient Chinese believe it could grant eternal life? The answer lies in the intersection of biology and belief. The Taisui does have genuine medicinal properties. The polysaccharides that form its matrix have been shown to have immunomodulatory effects, they can influence the activity of the immune system. Some studies suggest anti-tumor properties, though the research is preliminary and far from conclusive. The microbial community produces various bioactive compounds that may have therapeutic applications. In other words, consuming Taisui might actually make you feel better, not immortal, but healthier, more energetic, less susceptible to certain illnesses. In an era before modern medicine, before antibiotics and vaccines and scientific nutrition, such effects would have seemed miraculous. A substance that made the sick feel well, that gave energy to the exhausted, that seemed to reverse the effects of aging, and what else could it be but the elixir of immortality? The legends were not lies, they were interpretations. People consumed Taisui and experienced real benefits. They attributed those benefits to supernatural causes because they had no framework for understanding the biology involved. The stories grew with each retelling, each recovery from illness becoming evidence of life extension, each improvement in health becoming proof of immortality. The same pattern appears throughout the history of medicine. Willow bark was used for thousands of years to treat pain and fever. Ancient peoples attributed its effects to spiritual properties. Modern science identified the active compound salicylic acid Zan and synthesized it into aspirin. Foxglove was used in folk medicine to treat dropsy and fluid retention caused by heart failure. The plant was believed to have magical properties. Modern science identified digitalis, a compound that strengthens heart contractions, and developed it into life-saving cardiac medications. The Taisui fits this pattern, a substance with genuine biological activity, interpreted through a supernatural framework, eventually explained by science. The immortality was never real, but the medicine might have been closing. The flesh that remains. Let's return one last time to that farmer in Shanxi, standing in his half-dug well, holding a lump of pale flesh that had emerged from the earth. What did he actually find? He found a microbial community millions of tiny organisms living together in a complex, self-sustaining ecosystem. He found a biological structure that had evolved over millions of years, long before humans existed, long before anyone dreamed of immortality. He found something genuinely remarkable. Not because it could grant eternal life, it cannot. Not because it was supernatural, it was not, but because it represents a form of life that challenges our categories, that blurs our boundaries, that reminds us how much we still don't understand about the living world. The Taisui is not magic, but it is a mystery, a mystery that science has partially solved but not entirely exhausted. We know what it is made of, we know how it survives, We know why it behaves the way it does, but we don't know everything. We don't know exactly how these microbial communities form in the first place. We don't know why they appear in some locations and not others. We don't know the full range of species they contain or the full extent of their capabilities. The Taisui remains, in some sense, what it has always been. A reminder that the world contains wonders we have not yet fully explained. The first emperor of China spent his life searching for immortality. He sent expeditions to mythical islands. He consumed mercury elixirs. He built a tomb meant to last forever. He never found what he was looking for, but perhaps he was looking for the wrong thing. Immortality is not a substance you can dig from the ground or brew in an alchemist's laboratory. It is not a flesh you can consume or a medicine you can swallow. If immortality exists at all, it exists in the questions we ask, the mysteries we pursue, the wonder we feel when we encounter something we cannot explain. The Taisui cannot make you live forever, but the curiosity it inspires Jan the desire to understand, to investigate, to know Jan that is as close to immortality as any of us will ever get. The flesh remains in the earth, waiting to be discovered. The questions remain in our minds, waiting to be answered. And the search continues.